Hi, and welcome to Hoffman's Hot Seat. I'm Tom Hoffman with One-to-One Media, and I'm joined today by John Oshel, President and CEO at SwiftPage. And today, John and I will be talking about the 4 C's of customer data. John, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks, Tom. It's a pleasure to see you.
You too. So, John, what are the 4 C's of customer data?
You know, Tom, it's an interesting question. I've been in the information business for quite some time in my career. And a lot of people always say, you know, how do you make sure that your data is correct? Well, you know, institute a quality program, etc. So we came up with what we call the 4 C's of customer data. And the 4 C's stand for currency, correctness, consistency, and completeness. And if you think about a CRM system, a customer service system, whatever it is, if you don't have the 4 C's associated with your customer data, it's going to be really difficult to have a very long-term intimate relationship with your customers. So let's start with the first 2. So currency and correctness, they go hand in hand. If you don't have current information and correct information, you're not going to be able to contact your customers, you're not going to be able to outreach and have a conversation with them. So what does that mean? You switch jobs, you have a new email address. Okay, if I don't have that email address, I'm sending you information or emails to a wrong address, it doesn't come back. I think, okay, I don't have a relationship with Tom anymore. So currency and correctness are fundamental to making sure you have great data. Consistency is so important these days. If you think about just as an individual, how much information you have about your contacts in so many different places. It could be in LinkedIn, it could be in Twitter, it could be in Facebook, it could be in Outlook, Gmail, it doesn't matter. They're all over the place. And if you don't have consistency across all those platforms, again, you're going to run the risk of not having the right relationship with your customer.
Sure.
Now, completeness is an interesting thought. I mean, people think, okay, completeness is like I need to have Tom's birthday, his wife's name, you know, what's his address, etc. And that's all very interesting information and very important. But when we talk about completeness, it's about capturing every interaction you have with that customer or prospect or lead, etc. So this is a meeting, this is an interaction, I need to capture that information. I may shoot an email and you open that email, I want that interaction, I want to know what that is. No, God forbid if we have a phone call these days, people don't call each other, but if you do, you have that, that's an interaction. You do a transaction, you swipe your credit card on a square or something like that, that's an interaction. All of that information makes up completeness. And if you have those 4 C's, and then you have the ability to begin to go in and mine that and look at all the different trends associated with all of that interaction and all that completeness, that's when you really have a very long and intimate relationship with your customers.
Interesting. So, John, in your work and communications with clients and prospects, do they tend to struggle most with one of the 4 C's, or is it an across-the-board type of issue?
I think right now there's so much information in so many different platforms that both currency, correctness, and also consistency is the big challenge, particularly for small businesses, right? So, you know, they'll have information in Gmail or something like that. They'll have Twitter, they'll have LinkedIn, and they don't really connect the dots that say, you know, all that information, if you bring that all together and make it consistent, will actually help you with completeness. So I think those are the ones that, and people move around so much and their information changes so rapidly today that I think, you know, currency and correctness is definitely top of the list, and consistency is right there with it.
As you mentioned before, there's so much information coming into organizations that many decision makers are struggling and wallowing, and what do I do? I don't know where to start. Can you offer some recommendations there?
Yeah, I think that the number one thing, and this, you know, it hasn't changed for years, but find what is your authoritative source. I think that's the real issue that most companies have. And I don't care if it's a multi-billion-dollar enterprise or it's a solopreneur that's one person shop. Find out what is going to be your authoritative source, and it could be, you know, it's going to be our financial system, it's going to be our CRM system, whatever it is, or it's going to be my Outlook is going to be my authoritative source. And I'm going to make sure that every time I update something somewhere, I make sure that I bring it back in. Now, it helps if you have tools that allow you to do that, where you have, you know, one tool that automatically goes out and says, okay, let me comb for things that have changed and bring that in. So I think the authoritative source is the number one thing to do. And once you have that, I think again, whether you're an enterprise or you're all the way down to, you know, a single person business, governance is huge. If you don't have data governance, it's just going to get you know, out of whack. And
Sure.
so, you know, take the time to set up those processes. You know, if you're an individual, take the time to say, I'm going to make sure I look at that, you know, once a week or once a month or something along those lines. And then obviously, if you're an enterprise, if you don't have a data governance group, particularly now when we're talking about big data and how much data is really being stored, if you don't have, you know, we like to call them data stewards. Some people call them data czars. You know, it's a different type of things. But if you don't have that processes set up, it's going to be really hard to keep that consistent.
Sure. Well, why don't we talk about currency for a moment? As you know, there are situations where real-time data can be critical for use in taking the next best action with a customer, let's say. But then there are other situations where the data doesn't have to be real-time necessarily. Can you talk a little bit about that and how companies can reach a happy medium between the two?
Yeah, I mean, there's a cost associated with real time, right? And it's been there for years. And you know, whether it's with an interface or whether it's with, you know, some kind of transaction or whatever, everybody wants to try and strive to as close as they can get to real time as possible. But again, a cost associated with that. I think there are certain aspects of your business that needs to be real time. If you've got a customer that has a problem and they've you know, contacted you with you need to get that as near to real time as you possibly can. That's information that you need to have, right? Because that's an unhappy customer that if you let sit is not going to be good, if, you know, those type of things. And then I think there's other aspects of your business. I think, you know, sometimes people think, well, you know, I've got a customer that just gave me an order and, you know, well, if I wait a day or something and let them know. And again, that's kind of near real time as well. You want to have that interaction. If you or I interact with a company and then right away they come back and say, hey, Tom, thank you so much for your business. We really appreciate it. Is there anything else? And you're like, oh, that was a really nice interaction. I think I would like to have that again. Or if it's 3 days later, you're like, oh, that doesn't feel right or whatever. So I think it's really taking a look at your process, your entire process with your customer and identifying that, you know, these areas need to be closer to real time as possible. And some of these areas can wait a little bit. Focus your attention on putting in place processes and systems to, you know, contact you, and whether, you know, if you're using a tool that as soon as somebody does a transaction with you, it texts you and say, you know, hey, Tom just did a transaction, why don't you shoot him a call? Or shoot him an email or something like that. Or sometimes, now be careful if it's automated, because I think all of us know when we get an automated transaction back from a company, it's like, hey, you know, Tom H, you know, thank you, or, you know, my first name is Henry, so I'd go by H John. So if I ever get an email that says, hey, H John, I know, okay, that's not somebody that's really, you know, focusing on me. It's just an automated mail merge letter that went out. So just be very, very careful of how you interact with your customer.
Yeah, oh, good advice. So you had also touched on cost before, and I wanted to probe that a little bit, you know, because I'm hearing more and more from people that the importance of looking at the returns that can be generated from different data sets. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering, you know, to what extent you're seeing companies actually take steps to try to measure the returns on different types of data, so this can guide whether to increase investments in certain data sets or potentially decelerate investments in other data sets.
No, it's a great point, and I think the number one step to doing any kind of an ROI is you've got to get the information, right? So if you're dealing with only a certain set of interactions that you're dealing with your customer, your leads, your prospect, you're probably not understanding exactly what it's taking to you know, drive that process from lead into customer and then retain that customer. So that's why it's really, really important that you get every interaction. So if I send a campaign, you know, how did that person interact with that campaign? If I had a meeting with that person, how was the interaction? What was the the interactions that led up to a transaction? And if you can get that information, then you can start parsing it and start saying, okay, you know what? The returns off of a email campaign are 40% higher than, you know, just a blast social campaign or something along those lines. It's funny that a lot of the data that we are looking at, and we have an opportunity with our ACT product line. We have over 8 million people that, you know, from the beginning of ACT. ACT's been around for 27 years, have used ACT. And we have the ability to go back and look at all these databases, and we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of transactions and interactions that are in databases, and we've written a ton of algorithms to go through and kind of parse through those, and you start looking at different trends. And that's actually how we kind of devised our recommendation architecture that underlies the new ACT portfolio that's actually being announced today, by the way. But you know, as you look at the transaction, it's if you pick up the phone and you call somebody, the likelihood of a transaction goes up so much higher. And in today's world, it's so funny because we all think it's all automated. Everybody wants to just do everything via Twitter or whatever, and you do that. But you know, you if you pick up and you get that personal touch, you know, you get a higher return on investment so much more than other areas. So
Sure.
it's still back to the old people like to interact with people.
Absolutely. So, John, can you also point to examples of clients that you feel are really succeeding with the 4 Cs?
You know, I think that's a really interesting question. And where the 4 Cs came from was it came from data companies. So, you know, people buy, whether it's IRI or whether it's IHS or those types of companies that are actually selling information out into the marketplace, and that's their livelihood, right? So if the data isn't, you know, all 4 Cs, people aren't going to buy it. And so I think those companies in that industry really set the tone. And then if you kind of go back into now how are people using that, I think if you look at consumer packaged goods companies, they're really good at that. I think
Sure.
there's some high-end fashion companies we deal with our SalesLogix product line that are extremely good at understanding you know, every interaction to the point of when a customer walks in the door, they know exactly who that customer is, what they've, you know, what their sizes are, and it's a really interesting things. And it's all on any device that you can get in. So let's say you walk into a very high-end store. I won't say the name of it, and you know, all the associates that are there, they have iPads or, you know, phones or whatever. Instantaneously, a message goes out to every one of them. Tom just walked in the door. And oh, by the way, Tom was here last week, and here's all the things that Tom purchased. And oh, by the way, Tom likes these. This is Tom's size, you know, et cetera. You know, so that kind of relationship is, you know, you have to be careful. There's walking a fine line of that's kind of freaky. You're understanding everything that I do versus hey, this is a really good experience because they know who I am. So I think you're beginning to see that it's creeping into each one of the kind of the more consumery type areas, but that can be anything from a floor shop to a pizza shop to, you know, even to a landscaper or something along those lines. So I think that's kind of where you're seeing it. I think it started very high in the big information companies, went to the very big consumer packaged goods companies, and it's just starting to filter its way down to all the companies.
Right. Well, John, thanks so much for your time this morning.
I appreciate it, Tom. Thanks so much. Great to see you.
You too.